The scent of rain was in the air, a damp, metallic promise of the storm to come, and I remember standing on my own porch, the weathered boards smooth and familiar under my palm, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. Inside my house, the home I had built with my late husband, Robert, over 45 years ago, a different kind of storm was brewing. I could hear the low murmur of voices, my daughter Elena's, sharp and insistent, and my son David's, a placating, deeper hum. They thought I was napping in my room, that the gentle closing of my door meant I was lost to the world, but my sleep was a fragile thing, easily broken by the tension that had been thickening in the air for months. I pushed the screen door open, its familiar creak a sound I'd known for decades, and stepped into the living room. The lamplight was warm, pooling on the oriental rug Robert and I bought on a trip to Turkey a lifetime ago. It illuminated the faces of my children, who sat on the sofa I'd reupholstered myself in a cream-colored fabric now slightly faded by the sun. Elena's face, usually so composed, was pinched, her lips a thin, bloodless line. David would not meet my eyes, instead focusing on a loose thread on the cuff of his shirt. "Mother, you're awake," Elena said, her voice a little too bright, like a light switched on in a dark room, startling and unnatural. "I was just resting my eyes," I said, my own voice sounding thin and reedy in the large room. "What's all this about?" I gestured vaguely at the two of them, at the serious set of their shoulders. David finally looked up, his kind eyes shadowed with something I couldn't name. "Guilt, perhaps." "It's nothing to worry about, Mom. We were just talking about the future." "My future?" I asked, settling slowly into my armchair, the one that had molded itself to Robert's frame and now, imperfectly, to mine. The fabric smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco and the lavender sachets I kept in the drawers. "Everyone's future," Elena clarified, her tone smoothing out, becoming practiced, reasonable. "It's just, we've noticed things, Mom. Little things. The stove was left on last Tuesday. You forgot about your bridge game with Susan last week. You called David, Robert, twice on the phone yesterday." Each statement was a small, sharp pebble dropped into the quiet pond of the room. The forgotten stove was a single incident, a moment of distraction while I was canning tomatoes, the scent of vinegar and dill still sharp in my kitchen. The bridge game had slipped my mind, it was true, but only because I'd had a headache. And calling David by his father's name, that was just a heartache, a trick of a lonely mind, not a failing one. "I'm 78 years old, Elena," I said, trying to keep the weariness from my voice. "I'm allowed to be forgetful. It doesn't mean I'm senile." "It's not just being forgetful, Mom," David said softly, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "It's a pattern. We're worried about you living here all alone. This big house, the stairs, it's a lot to manage. And with your finances, you've missed a couple of property tax payments. The county sent a notice." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I had set those bills aside in the blue porcelain dish on my desk, intending to write the checks after my arthritis flare-up subsided. The pain in my hands had been bad, making the simple act of holding a pen a chore. How had they known about that? "I was getting to it," I said, my voice firmer now. "My hands have been hurting. You know that." "We know," Elena said, her voice dripping with a sympathy that felt sticky and false. "And that's exactly why we think it's time for us to step in and help more. To make things easier for you. We've been talking to a lawyer, a very nice man named Mr. Sterling. He specializes in elder care and estate management." The words elder care landed like a physical blow. I looked from my daughter's determined face to my son's troubled one. This wasn't a conversation. This was an ambush. The cozy, familiar room with its ticking grandfather clock and the faint smell of lemon polish suddenly felt like a trap. "What kind of help?" I asked, my throat dry. "We think it would be best if we petitioned the court to become your legal guardians," Elena said, the words delivered with a rehearsed calm. "Just for a little while. To handle the bills, the house maintenance, your medical care. It would take all the stress off your shoulders." "You want to have me declared incompetent," I whispered, the truth of it finally dawning, cold and horrifying. "You want to take control of my life. Of my home. Of Robert's and my money." "It's not like that, Mom," David interjected, his voice pained. "It's for your own protection. We love you. We just want what's best for you." But I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was looking at Elena, at the faint, triumphant gleam in her eyes that she couldn't quite conceal. This was her doing. David was just her pawn, his gentle nature easily manipulated by her forceful will. I thought of the trust Robert had left, a comfortable nest egg built from a lifetime of work, the deed to this house, the land. It was all suddenly, terrifyingly, on the table. "Get out," I said, my voice low and shaking. "Mother, please, be reasonable," Elena began. "Get out of my house," I shouted, the force of it surprising even me. The sound echoed in the room, silencing the tick of the clock for a moment. They left then, with hurried, unhappy steps. Elena shot me a look that was a mixture of pity and irritation, while David looked back, his eyes full of a genuine sorrow that broke my heart all over again. The front door clicked shut, and I was alone in the sudden, immense quiet, the only sound the first heavy drops of rain beginning to fall against the window panes. I sat in my chair, in the home that was my sanctuary, and felt the walls of my life closing in. The fight, I knew, had only just begun. The weeks that followed were a slow, grinding erosion of my autonomy, a cold war fought with paperwork and polite, devastating visits. Mr. Sterling, the lawyer, was indeed a nice man. He had a soft handshake and a voice that never rose above a soothing, professional murmur. He came to the house with Elena and David one bright Tuesday morning, the sun streaming in and making dust motes dance in the air, a cruel contrast to the darkness of the meeting. He laid out documents on the coffee table, his leather briefcase smelling of new cowhide and ambition. "Now, Eleanor," he said, using my full name, which I had always hated, "this is just a standard petition for guardianship. Given your age and the concerning incidents your children have documented, the court will likely order a competency evaluation. It's a mere formality." I could feel the weight of the evaluation, a sword of Damocles hanging over my head by the thinnest of threads. My own children were building a case against me. They had a list, I learned. A list of every time I'd misplaced my keys, every time I'd repeated a story, every time I'd been tired or confused or simply sad. They had turned the normal, human landscape of my aging into a pathology. "I don't need a guardian," I said, my hands clenched in my lap, the knuckles white. "I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." "Of course you feel that way," Mr. Sterling said, his tone placating. "Most people in your situation do. But sometimes, from the outside, the picture looks different. Your children are only acting out of love and concern." David wouldn't look at me. Elena nodded, her expression one of grave responsibility. "We just want you to be safe, Mom." The word safe had become a prison cell. I knew I needed a lawyer of my own, but the process felt overwhelming. Who could I trust? The world had suddenly become a place full of hidden agendas and soft-spoken threats. I found myself second-guessing everything, my own mind now the enemy. Was I really forgetting things? Was I truly becoming incapable? The seed of doubt they had planted was taking root, a poisonous vine choking my confidence. It was my old friend, Susan, who pulled me back from the brink. She came over one afternoon, bringing with her the smell of fresh bread and unshakable loyalty. She found me sitting in the dim living room, the curtains drawn, unable to muster the energy to even make a cup of tea. "Eleanor, this is nonsense," she declared, her voice cutting through the fog of my despair. She was a small, bird-like woman with the spirit of a lion. "I've known you for 50 years. You're sharper than half the people in this town. This isn't about your mind. This is about your money. Everyone knows Elena has been struggling since that husband of hers left, and David, well, David has always been too soft for his own good." She thrust a business card into my hand. "You call this man. His name is Benjamin Cruz. He's a fighter. He doesn't play nice like that Sterling fellow." The card was simple, thick cardstock. Benjamin Cruz, ESQ Family Law and Civil Litigation. It felt like a lifeline. The first meeting in Mr. Cruz's office was a shock to the system. It was all clean lines, bright light, and a view of the city that seemed to promise a broader perspective. He was a young man, perhaps in his late 40s, with intense dark eyes and a directness that was both jarring and refreshing. "Mrs. Willoughby," he said, after listening to my story for nearly an hour without interruption, his fingers steepled under his chin. "What your children are attempting is, unfortunately, not uncommon. It's called granny snatching in some circles. They use the legitimate fears around aging and dementia to gain control of assets. The court, wanting to err on the side of caution, often grants these petitions unless there is a vigorous defense." He leaned forward, his gaze holding mine. "The key is the competency evaluation. They will send you to a doctor of their choosing, someone who often works with elder law firms and whose findings tend to support the petition. We need to be prepared for that. We need our own evaluation, from an independent, reputable neurologist and psychiatrist. It's the only way to fight their narrative." The word fight felt good. It felt solid. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of my old self, the woman who had run a household, raised 2 children, and buried a husband, all with a quiet, stubborn strength. "Then we fight," I said, and my voice did not shake. The day of their chosen evaluation arrived, a gray, drizzly morning that matched my mood. The doctor's office was in a sterile medical building that smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Dr. Albright was a thin man with cold hands and a disinterested manner. He asked me a series of questions, some simple, some designed to confuse. "What year is it? Who is the president?" Count backwards from 100 by 7s. He showed me pictures and asked me to remember them later. He had me copy a drawing of a cube. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Every hesitation, every moment I took to gather my thoughts, felt like a failure. I knew he was noting it all down, every tiny crack in my composure. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a monotonous, judgmental drone. When it was over, I felt drained, my spirit bruised. I had no doubt what his report would say. But I had my own appointment, one Mr. Cruz had secured. Dr. Isla Thorne's practice was different. It was in a warm, converted brownstone that smelled of old books and peppermint tea. She herself was a woman with kind eyes and a calm, unhurried presence. She didn't just test my memory, she talked to me. She asked about my life, about Robert, about what I loved to do, about the books I was reading. She asked about the pressure from my children, and I found myself telling her everything, the words tumbling out in a relieved torrent. Her evaluation was thorough, spanning 2 long sessions. It included brain scans and detailed cognitive tests, but it felt like a conversation, not an inquisition. As I left her office after the final session, she placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Try not to worry, Eleanor," she said. "You are a remarkable woman. Just remember who you are." The court date loomed, a black mark on my calendar. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the silent house, running my hands over the familiar surfaces, the smooth banister Robert had installed, the cool granite of the kitchen counters we'd saved for years to buy. This was more than a house, it was a museum of our life together, every scratch and smudge a memory. The thought of losing it, of having my choices taken from me by my own flesh and blood, was a physical pain in my chest. The morning of the hearing, I dressed with care, choosing a navy blue suit that Robert had always loved. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was lined, my hair fully white, but my eyes, I saw with a surge of defiance, were still my own. They held the same light, the same person who had lived a full and complex life. I was not a collection of symptoms. I was Eleanor Willoughby. Mr. Cruz met us at the courthouse, his demeanor calm and focused. Elena and David were already there, seated at the opposite table with Mr. Sterling. Elena was wearing a severe black dress, her posture rigid. David looked pale and miserable. We did not speak. The courtroom was a cavernous, intimidating space, all polished wood and solemn echoes. The air was cool and still, smelling of lemon-scented polish and old fear. The judge, a woman with a stern face and intelligent eyes named Judge Watkins, called the court to order. The proceedings began, a dry, formal recitation of petitions and responses. Then, Mr. Sterling called Dr. Albright to the stand. His testimony was a clinical dissection of my supposed decline. He spoke of mild cognitive impairment, deficits in executive function, and a pronounced pattern of memory loss consistent with early-stage dementia. He cited the forgotten stove, the missed appointments, the confusion with names. In his cold, precise language, my life was reduced to a checklist of failings. When Mr. Sterling finished, I felt hollowed out, the doubt they had planted blooming into a terrifying certainty. Was he right? Was I just too proud to see it? Then it was Mr. Cruz's turn. He approached the witness stand, his movements deliberate. "Dr. Albright," he began, his voice conversational. "How many competency evaluations do you perform for the firm of Henderson and Sterling, Mr. Sterling's firm, in a typical year?" Dr. Albright shifted in his seat. I couldn't say precisely. A dozen, perhaps. Would it be fair to say that the majority of these evaluations result in a finding of incompetency? Objection, relevance, Mr. Sterling said, rising. "I'm establishing the witness's potential bias, Your Honor," Mr. Cruz replied smoothly. "Overruled. You may answer, Doctor." Dr. Albright cleared his throat. "It is common that individuals referred for such evaluations are, in fact, experiencing cognitive decline." "That wasn't my question, Doctor," Mr. Cruz said, his voice still pleasant. "Let me rephrase. In your professional relationship with Mr. Sterling, what percentage of your reports have supported the petition for guardianship?" The room was silent. Dr. Albright's eyes darted toward Mr. Sterling. "I would estimate, perhaps 80 or 90%. 80 or 90%, Mr. Cruz repeated, letting the number hang in the quiet air. "Thank you, Doctor. No further questions." The damage was done. The judge's pen scratched across her notepad. Then, Mr. Cruz called his witness. "The defense calls Dr. Isla Thorne." She entered the courtroom with a quiet authority, her calm presence a balm after Dr. Albright's coldness. Mr. Cruz led her through her credentials, which were impeccable, and then asked her for her findings. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Thorne said, her voice clear and confident, carrying to every corner of the room, "Eleanor Willoughby is a cognitively healthy woman for her age. She shows no signs of dementia or any cognitive disorder that would impair her ability to manage her person or her estate." I felt a sob catch in my throat and forced it down. "Could you elaborate, Doctor?" Mr. Cruz asked. Certainly, she said, turning slightly to address the judge directly. The deficits noted by the previous examiner are, in my assessment, entirely consistent with the effects of stress, grief, and anxiety. Mrs. Willoughby is under an immense amount of pressure. She is grieving the loss of her husband, a profound life event, and is now facing the threat of losing her independence and her home at the hands of her children. This would cause significant anxiety and distractibility in anyone. Her brain scans are clean. Her cognitive testing, when administered in a supportive, low-stress environment, fell well within the normal range for her demographic. What we are seeing is not a diseased mind, but a healthy mind reacting to a profoundly toxic and stressful situation. She went on, dismantling every one of Dr. Albright's points with logic and compassion. The forgotten stove? A single incident, common in a population of all ages. The missed bridge game? Coinciding with a documented arthritis flare-up, a source of significant physical pain. Calling David Robert? A common linguistic slip, especially in the context of grief and long-term familiarity. In short, Your Honor, Dr. Thorne concluded, Eleanor Willoughby is not incapable. She is a victim of a campaign to pathologize her normal aging process in order to gain control of her assets. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. I dared a glance at my children. Elena's face was a mask of fury, her knuckles white as she gripped the table. David had buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. In that moment, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound, devastating sorrow. Mr. Sterling, clearly shaken, rose for a cross-examination, but his questions were weak, faltering. He could not find a crack in Dr. Thorne's professional armor. When it was over, Judge Watkins did not need to retire to consider her decision. She looked from the documentation to Dr. Thorne, and then directly at Elena and David. This court has heard compelling evidence from a highly respected, independent expert, she began, her voice firm. Evidence that not only refutes the petition for guardianship but suggests it was sought under questionable premises. The petition is denied, in its entirety. Furthermore, I am referring the findings of Dr. Thorne to the State Bar Association for a review of the conduct of Mr. Sterling and his clients in this matter. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. The sound was final. The drive home was a silent, surreal journey. Mr. Cruz had tried to talk to me, his voice full of a professional satisfaction, but I could only nod, my mind numb. He dropped me off at my house, the house that was still, for now, entirely mine. I stood on the porch, the same porch where I had stood months ago sensing the coming storm, and watched his car disappear down the street. The victory felt hollow, a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. I had won. I had proven my competence, my sanity, to a court of law. But I had lost my children. The chasm that had opened between us in that courtroom felt wider and deeper than any ocean. I went inside, the familiar silence of the house now feeling heavy and mournful. I walked from room to room, not seeing the furniture or the pictures, but seeing the ghosts of the past, Elena as a little girl, twirling in the living room, David building elaborate block towers that would tumble with a crash, and then his infectious laughter. I had fought for this house, for these memories, and in doing so, I had shattered the very family that had created them. The days bled into one another. The phone did not ring. The mailbox remained empty of anything but bills and flyers. Susan came by, her cheerfulness a brave, fragile thing in the face of my grief. She tried to talk about the weather, about books, about anything but the elephant in the room. I appreciated her effort, but I was lost in a fog of my own making. It was a full 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, when I heard a car door shut outside. I peered through the curtains and saw David's sedan parked at the curb. My heart leapt into my throat, a painful, hopeful thud. He was alone. I opened the door before he could knock. He stood on the welcome mat, looking older, his shoulders slumped. He held a small cardboard box in his hands. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Can I come in?" I stepped back, wordlessly, and he entered. He placed the box on the coffee table. It was filled with photo albums, the old, sticky-backed kind from when the children were small. "I've been going through my attic," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I found these." We sat on the sofa, the same sofa where he and Elena had delivered their ultimatum, and he opened one of the albums. The pages were brittle, the colors faded. There was a picture of Robert, young and handsome, holding a toddler Elena on his shoulders. Another of me, my hair dark and long, teaching a small, serious David how to plant tomatoes in the garden. We didn't speak for a long time, just turned the pages, the rustling sound loud in the quiet room. The scent of old paper and dried glue rose from the album, a smell of time itself. Finally, David closed the book. His hands were trembling. "I am so sorry, Mom," he whispered, the words torn from him. So sorry. I let Elena convince me. She kept talking about safety, about how we were being responsible, and I was so scared that something would happen to you, that I'd be to blame for not acting. But I was wrong. I was a coward. I saw you in that courtroom, and I saw the strength I've always known, and I knew. I knew we had done a terrible, terrible thing. Tears were streaming down his face now, unchecked. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself. But I had to come here and tell you that. I lost my father, and I almost lost my mother because I was too weak to stand up for her. I looked at my son, my gentle boy who had always felt things too deeply, who had always sought peace even when it cost him his own voice. The anger I had been clinging to, the sharp, protective shell around my heart, began to soften and crack. He was not the enemy. He was a lost soul, manipulated by a sister whose own fears had curdled into greed. I reached out and took his hand. It was cold. "Oh, David," I said, my own voice choked with tears. "I forgive you." It was true. In that moment, looking at his ravaged, sincere face, I felt the weight of my own bitterness lift. The fight was not with him. He had been a casualty, just as I had. He broke then, sobbing into his hands, his body shaking with the force of his remorse. I put my arms around him, this grown man, my son, and held him as I had when he was a child and had skinned his knee. We sat there for a long time, surrounded by the smiling ghosts of our happier past, and began, tentatively, the long and painful process of rebuilding. He visited often after that. We didn't talk about the lawsuit or the evaluation. We talked about small things. He fixed the leaky faucet in the kitchen. He helped me weed the garden. We started having Sunday dinners again, just the two of us. The house began to feel like a home once more, though a quieter, more thoughtful one. The wound was healing, but the scar would always remain, a permanent reminder of how fragile trust can be. Elena was another matter. There was no apology, no visit, no phone call. She had become a ghost in our family, a presence defined by her absence. I heard through the grapevine, from Susan who heard from a friend, that she had taken a job in a city a few hours away. I grieved for her, for the daughter I had loved and raised, whose ambition had somehow twisted into this cold, hard thing. I left the door open, in my heart, but I knew she would have to be the one to walk through it. Months passed. The seasons turned. The sharp ache of the betrayal softened into a dull, chronic sorrow, a part of my new landscape. One afternoon, I was in the garden, the rich, dark soil cool and crumbly under my fingers, the smell of tomato vines and damp earth filling my senses. I was planting new annuals, my hands, though still sometimes stiff, moving with a sure, practiced rhythm. David was there, trimming the hedges. The steady snip-snip-snip of his shears was a comforting, domestic sound. He looked over at me and smiled, a real, unburdened smile that reached his eyes. "The garden looks great, Mom. Just like it always did." I sat back on my heels, wiping my forehead with the back of my glove. The sun was warm on my face. I looked at my house, its white paint gleaming, the porch swing moving gently in the breeze. I looked at my son, who had found his way back to me. I thought of Robert, and I knew he would be proud of the fight I had fought, not just in the courtroom, but the harder fight for forgiveness afterward. The story, I knew, was not a simple one of victory and defeat. It was a story of love twisted and love reclaimed, of betrayal and the hard, slow road to redemption. I had been declared incapable, but in fighting that declaration, I had discovered a deeper capacity within myself, the capacity to withstand heartbreak, to defend my own life, and ultimately, to find the strength to forgive. The farce had been revealed, but the truth that remained was far more complex and human. I was Eleanor Willoughby. I was capable. I was loved. And in my garden, with the sun on my face and my son by my side,